Welcome to another episode of the Learner's Mindset Discussions. I'm Dr. Dwayne Harapnik,
I'm Dr. Talissa Thibodeau.
and today we're going to be exploring online discussions, and more specifically, how do you use them? How do you set them up? How do you make them effective? Yeah, how do you measure them? These are some of the ideas that we're going to be taking a look at. And this discussion has really come about because as many of you may or may not know, I've been involved in online learning since 1995, a long time. And over those years, I've been looking for that magic formula for online discussions. And as they've grown into an integral part of the online learning component, measurement always comes into play. And there's this tendency to measure interactions. The numbers of interactions. And as soon as you start measuring interactions, students say, well, how many times do I need to interact? And we've got this magic formula that we seem to all agree upon. I shouldn't say all of us agree upon, but there seems to be this magic formula of posting once and responding to two interactions. Is that effective? Does that work? We're going to explore those ideas today. And in exploring those, I hope that we're going to potentially provide some alternatives. So what do you think about this, Dr. Thibodeau? Post one, respond twice. What are your thoughts on this formula?
It's something I think we see all too often, and students will come to me and ask me, to get this many points, do I have to post 2 times, 3 times, and how long should it be? And I think that prescriptive format really kind of limits their creativity. It also kind of helps them to not really, they become, I guess, learner dependent a little bit on us, and they expect us to kind of, give them a formulaic approach to their learning. And that doesn't really allow them authentic opportunities to connect and collaborate. So I think this is an important topic that we need to address, and also share this, with the broader community, and see what others are experiencing in terms of this.
Yeah, I think it really is an important topic. And again, our goal with these discussions is to really add to the learning community and explore ideas and make sure that we're, identifying ways that we can enhance learning. And to be fair, if you have an information transfer-based model, and if it's teacher-centric, and if you're lecturing or you're recording your lectures and putting them online, and you're asking students to give you back that information in a test or an essay, which is kind of the norm, even in online learning, that happens all the time. Well, then, this formulaic approach to measuring online discussions, it makes sense. It follows, because if you're going to be measuring, students' regurgitation of information in other areas, well, then the online discussions simply become another area where you're measuring that interaction. And to be fair to learners, they need to know how much regurgitation, when do they regurgitate, and how do they interact with their classmates when they're regurgitating that information. So if you're using that information regurgitation model, that's standard, standards-based model, then that formula makes sense. I'm not really fond of it, but it makes sense. However, and I see.
Yeah, Dr. H, though, when I hear you say this, I think, though, is learning based on interaction? Is that really where we want our learners to only focus on discussion boards and interaction?
Well, I would say no, and I think I'm qualified to say that from my experience. But more importantly, if you look at the literature, there's a ton of literature on this, and I've been following this literature for the last couple of decades. Yeah, the volume of interaction, or measuring interaction, or looking at interactions, the research is really clear. Just because students are interacting doesn't mean that they're learning, they're going deeper in their learning, and doesn't mean that it's meaningful. The key that the literature points to make the interactions meaningful is that the interactions, or the online discussions, have to have a purpose.
Mhm.
There has to be a purpose. And so when you look at the literature of people like Randy Garrix and Terry Anderson and people like that who have published in this area, they point to the proper design that can identify the purpose. They talk about having the proper leadership and direction and facilitation by the instructor, but they're still pointing to that very traditional based model. And what we found in our work, if you really want to add meaning and purpose to the learning environment, you actually have to turn that over to the learner. The learner can bring that meaning and purpose to what they're doing through authentic learning opportunities. And as we've seen within the digital learning and leading program and in our work, it's those authentic learning opportunities that can really make a difference to the purpose.
Mhm.
Thoughts on this?
Yeah, when you talked about some of the research, we try to really organize these conversations around what we've read, what we've seen. And I think of Roger Schenck and his work on the cognitive sciences. And he mentions, that thinking that students are not worried about the purpose of what they're being taught and the real reason behind why they're being taught these things. If they don't have that connection or that authentic opportunity to collaborate on the purpose, they're really missing something, because otherwise we just go back to that information transfer model, that kind of regurgitation of content, and they miss the real point. So they actually need to yes, they do need to interact, but they need to really understand the purpose behind collaboration and authentic learning through these discussion boards. So we have to be careful about how much we actually, we don't want to force this on them and have them, respond one time and then answer two other people. We really need to allow them to experience that purpose and authentic learning opportunity by having a bit of interaction that's real, genuine, and valuable.
I'm glad you mentioned this notion of interaction that's real, genuine, and valuable. And the best way to do that, again, from our experience, and we're publishing on this as well, and you can, our viewers can take a look at some of our research. We find that if you allow students to create their own project, an authentic learning opportunity, a real project they're working on, and in our case, in the digital learning and leading program, students do an innovation plan. So in our courses, we use our discussions as a place for students to come together, to explore their ideas, to find their voice, to master their voice, to develop their voice, to share their voice. They start working with their classmates, and they explore the different things they're doing, whether it's blended learning, one-to-one initiatives, mobile learning, whatever the case may be, whatever project is that they're working on. When the students start discussing their real work, it changes everything. They take ownership, they go much deeper. And then you don't actually have to take a look at whether or not they've asked one question, responded twice. The discussions take on a whole different perspective, and they become meaningful. The other thing that we've seen is, and I've seen this from my experience, when you give students ownership of the discussions, you have to be so careful as the teacher to not come in and interrupt, because as soon as you come into that discussion, especially if it's a discussion that the students really have ownership of, you can actually quench their discussion, because you're the authority, you're the external source, you're the person grading them. So they're careful what they say, and the research actually confirms this, that an instructor can actually hinder the level of interaction within the discussions. And this is especially the case if you're using authentic learning opportunities. So what we've seen in our program is that if you want to have real purpose and meaning, well, then give your learners those authentic learning opportunities, and then use the discussions as that place where they explore, they test out ideas, they find their voice, they do all those wonderful things. Any other ideas on that?
Yeah, this brings me back to Hattie's research on collaborative learning and the benefits of it, and feedback, specifically feedback. When I think about students' feedback, peer to peer, Hattie will say, and some of the other research will confirm that peer-to-peer feedback between one another is almost more important than the instructor's feedback. They want to really connect with someone who is also experiencing what they're experiencing. And I think what's valuable about that is that's a real, genuine, collaborative opportunity where they can experience COVA through revising and restructuring their ideas. So going back to the voice piece that you mentioned, I was thinking revising and restructuring ideas and using each other to do that. Hey, take a look at my work, and I'll take a look at yours. And having these genuine conversations about their innovation plans and what they're doing and how they're trying to move their ideas forward and what barriers they might run into and what challenges they might run into. And I think about what the research says in terms of dialogue and discourse between the instructor and the student, but also more importantly, almost between the students and, in and amongst themselves, is what the research points out is very impactful in terms of them being able to move their ideas forward. They need to have those opportunities where they can connect authentically and collaborate with one another. So any thoughts about that, Dr. H?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And talking about the research and taking a look at some indicators. I can't remember the actual author. I think it's Earlman. I'll have to look. I'll have to confirm this. But he has some indicators when he takes a look at and he surveys students, people in a variety of contexts. And his Earlman's guide in the last couple of years has shown that students respect each other's opinion as much or sometimes even more than the instructor, right? So the research is pretty clear. In the world of social media that we live in the world of instant communication, we know that our students and most people are looking to trusted peers. And if you've spent a course or two or a few months working with a few colleagues from across the country on similar innovation plans, it doesn't take long. And we've seen this interaction with our students. It doesn't take long for our students to come together and really develop a trustful relationship. And so they really respect each other's feedback. They're editing each other's work. They're proofing different things. It's really exciting to see what can be done if you give the students that space.
Yeah. I think about the opportunities they have to take an active learning role in their discussions and in their innovation plans they're doing just in our program, Digital Learning Leading. And I think when they take more of an active role in their learning and they collaborate and connect with other folks, they start to build those self-regulated learning strategies that they need. And when I just finished, writing a pretty comprehensive literature review on feedback and feed forward, one way to really get them to move their ideas forward and think about what they're doing on that metacognitive level is by connecting, collaborating, and taking that active role. And in doing so, that's how they become a little more self-regulated. So if you want to think about ways to move your learners from, this recipe and regurgitation model or this information transfer model of, post one and respond to these questions that I post, give them those opportunities to take an active role by being collaborative with one another, and having it a little bit more fluid and open, and letting them use the discussion board as an area where they have that opportunity to connect and learn in their own way. And I think that's impactful to the students. I think a lot of times, sometimes if you're an instructor and you look at why are, online discussions just kind of phasing out, why are they not having the impact that they used to? Well, once that newness wears off of, oh, I'm in an online class and now I've learned how to discuss. If they're just answering a bunch of questions that are not very meaningful to them and they don't really have purpose behind it and it doesn't connect to their innovation plan, they are then just answering questions and that's all they're doing. That's going to land right in their short-term memory and then goodbye. But if they're actually connecting on an authentic level, okay, if they have an opportunity, have a choice and take some ownership and have a voice in what they're learning and how they're learning it, this is essentially is learning how to learn. And that opens up another complete topic there. But Dr. H, any thoughts on that?
Well, I want to sort of connect something and piggyback on that. And it's this idea of answering questions, right? And you're so right. We want our learners to become self-directed. We don't just want them to answer questions. And so the research is pretty clear. One of the most important things that you can do when you're looking at designing online discussions in these online learning environments to further cognitive development and cognitive presence, what you need to do is look at the design. And so when you ask questions, you're not just asking regurgitative questions. You're not asking students to do that. And what we've seen, especially in the DLL program, if you have questions that relate to the project or the particular aspect of an assignment the students are working on. For example, if the students are working on part of their innovation plan and they're working on their literature review, so the questions on the discussion may encourage the students to share, their thoughts on their thesis statement and how they develop a certain thesis statement. How is that going to apply, and how far do they need to go? And you can ask questions about, how important the primary sources are, and so on and so forth. So all the questions that we put into our discussions are designed to allow students to go much deeper, and they take that interaction and it applies directly to the projects they're working on. So the discussions become a proving ground, a testing ground for the discussions or for their assignments and the work that they're doing on their authentic projects. So they aren't just responding to information. They aren't just responding twice and asking one question. So, the literature is quite clear. You have to have the right design, And I believe that, using the authentic learning environment, using online discussions as a place for students to explore, find their voice, to work ideas out, to work with each other and collaborate is part of the design.
And when you say design, I cannot help but think of the context and the conditions in which we set things up. In our program, I think of the context as the significant learning environment, and we have to even model that in everything that we do. So even the discussion boards have to model a significant learning environment, and I'm sure we'll do another video on that later. But the conditions that we set up, when you mention the design, I think of the conditions and allowing learners a bit of COVA, and I think of conditions and COVA kind of coming together within that discussion board. So within the context of a significant learning environment, we have these conditions where these students can then connect and make choices about their learning, take ownership, and revise and restructure their ideas through authentic learning opportunities. So it brings me back to some more of the feedback literature I've read about the context and the conditions being critical and so important to maximizing those student learning opportunities. I think that we're about at time. So if you have any final comments, we probably should wrap it up and then, move on. So any final thoughts on that, Dr. H?
We could go on for a long time on this. And I was just thinking the same thing too. We do need to wrap this up. And I just wanted to touch on something that I think is important. And you've mentioned this, you've seen this in the most recent literature and this art, the articles we're working on right now on feedback. And I've been following the literature and online discussions for a couple of decades now. And we're seeing this pattern. The research says this is what you should do. Meaningful, purposeful interactions. You have to go beyond just, having students post once or question something once, respond twice. You've got to have them go deeper. And yet we're not seeing that. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Well, rather than enter into the dialogue, I think the reason that we're not seeing it is that we do have a predominantly information transfer based model. And for the most part, it is working. It is working quite well. But I want to go back to this idea that even though it's working, I think what we're doing by giving our students authentic learning opportunities, creating those significant learning environments where they can actually bring meaning to the work that they're doing will work even better. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole goal of these learners mindset discussions. What can we do to help our learners use technology to enhance learning? Well, purpose, being meaningful, having discussions that are real and genuine, that can make the difference. Any last minute things you want to add, or are we ready to wrap up?
We're ready to wrap up. I think we've covered it.
Great. Looking forward to the next discussion. Thanks so much.